Our first one is arguably the most famous trade in American sports history. As the Red Sox were struggling financially, even with the multiple recent titles, Babe Ruth asked for a big pay raise, wanting his salary to go from $7,000 to $15,000, an amount only Ty Cobb was making, and they settled at $27,000 over the next 3 years. And after Ruth set a new home run record with 29 that year, Red Sox ownership knew that that contract was not going to be enough. And in December of 1919, the Yankees gave Red Sox owner Harry Frazee an offer he could not refuse, and they sold Ruth to the Yankees for $100,000 in cash, plus a $300,000 loan. Officially, it was just a cash transaction, but as I talked about in a recent video about weird trades, Frazee supposedly sold Ruth to finance the musical No No Nanette. That play did not open until 1925, by which time Frazee had sold the Red Sox, but it was based on a Frazee-produced play, My Lady Friends, which opened in 1919. And of course, this would go down as the most lopsided trade, or selling, as Babe Ruth would become a dominant force, providing as much offensive value as some teams. The Yankees really becoming the Yankees with this trade, as they won 25 World Series by the end of the century, while the Red Sox would start an 86-year drought, simply known as the Curse of the Bambino, dating back to this transaction. There will never be a trade as lopsided as this one, although you can really just call it a transaction, but at least they got to watch that play, instead of watching their players play in the World Series. A lot of trades come as a result of a promising player just not developing with the team. And here's a great example. Of the 1985 MLB draft, the Montreal Expos selected a 6'10 lefty from USC named Randy Johnson. He had a ton of potential with his overpowering fastball and the mere fact that he was intimidating his help, but he was also extremely wild. When he came up in 1988, he walked 26 batters in just 29 innings. Hitters didn't know where the ball was going, and neither did Randy Johnson. So not seeing much of a future with him, the Expos wanted something more stable. They packaged him with Gene Harris and Brian Holman and sent them to the Seattle Mariners in exchange for Mark Langston and Mike Campbell. Langston was strong, already an all-star, and one of the better lefties in the game, and he pitched pretty well for Montreal, but he was a free agent at the end of the season, where he would sign with the Angels, then become an all-star 3 more times. And those few months of Langston were basically all they got, as Mike Campbell never pitched an inning for the Expos. Meanwhile, Randy Johnson would figure it out in Seattle. It didn't happen overnight, but once he got his command under control, he became the most dominant pitcher in the game, winning a Cy Young with the Mariners while helping them reach the playoffs multiple times, then winning 4 more Cy Youngs with the Diamondbacks, along with the Co-World Series MVP, making 10 All-Star teams, winning 4 ERA titles, and striking out nearly 5,000 batters. He became the once-in-a-generation talent after a few mechanical fixes, and the Expos traded him away after just 11 big league games, all for just a rental. But Expos fans would be fine with a few bad trades if it meant they got to watch their team play again. The trade deadline for contending teams is all about the short term, and teams will often give up a future prospect and just hope for the best, or I guess the worst, for them. In 1987, the Detroit Tigers were in a tight playoff race, and they felt they needed at least one more reliable starting pitcher. So they made a deal, sending a 20-year-old prospect named John Smoltz to the Atlanta Braves in exchange for the veteran Doyle Alexander. Smoltz was a Michigan native and a lifelong Tigers fan who was drafted by the team in 1985, just like Randy Johnson. And he had a big arm, but his minor league numbers were not impressive, and Detroit did not think he was ready. Alexander, on the other hand, was exactly what they were looking for. He was experienced, dependable, and he was ready to go. And at first, the deal looked strong. Alexander was lights out. In 11 starts, he went 9-0 with a 1.53 ERA, helping the Tigers win the division. But the Tigers lost the ALCS to the Twins, and in the long term, this trade was one-sided. Alexander would decline, and he retired just 2 years later, while John Smoltz would blossom into a franchise player for the Braves. He became one of the most versatile and dominant pitchers in baseball, excelling as a starter and a closer. He won the Cy Young in '96, helped the Braves win the World Series in '95, and became the first player in MLB history to record both 200 wins and 150 saves. He finished with over 3,000 strikeouts and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2015. At the time, it looked like the Tigers had made the smart move, and Alexander did contribute to the division title. But in hindsight, they gave up a Hall of Famer for a rental. Though like all of these, you never know how things would have played out if he would have stayed. Like Randy Johnson, Pedro Martinez was dominant in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and made teams regret losing him. In this case, it was actually twice. The first came in 1993, when the Dodgers dealt him to the Montreal Expos for Delino DeShields. That one was bad enough, but in their defense, he was still just a reliever with a big arm, and he was not Pedro Martinez yet. But by 1997, he was Pedro Martinez. He had just won the Cy Young with a 1.9 ERA, and he was 25 years old and entering his prime. And so what did the Expos do? Before he would enter free agency, they would trade him to the Boston Red Sox for Carl Pavano and Tony Armas Jr. Pavano was a 13th round pick who had some promise in the minors, but he would go just 24-35 with the team. Armas was still in the low minors, and he would go on to post a 4.45 ERA during his time in Montreal. And that was all the Expos got, 2 unproven arms in exchange for the best pitcher in the game. It's understandable that the Expos are worried about losing Pedro in free agency, but it's obvious they could have gotten a lot more. Pedro went on to dominate in Boston, winning 2 more Cy Youngs, posting one of the greatest seasons ever in '99 and 2000, hoping the Red Sox break an 86-year drought, and cementing his legacy as a Hall of Famer. If the Expos ownership was taking the franchise at this point, then this was one of the clear signs. Similar to pitchers we already discussed, sometimes a team gives up on a player too early. In the 12th round of the '65 draft, the New York Mets selected a right-handed pitcher named Nolan Ryan, and he was very similar to Randy Johnson, a hard thrower and very intimidating. But he also had serious control issues early in his career. He helped the Mets win the World Series in 1969, but in 1971, he went 10-14 and walked almost 7 batters per 9 innings. In that offseason, the Mets decided they had seen enough. They packaged Ryan with 3 other players, Leroy Sin, Francisco Estrada, and Don Rose, and shipped them to the California Angels in exchange for veteran shortstop Jim Fregosi. At the time, Fregosi was a 6-time All-Star, but the trade immediately backfired. He had just 232 in his first season with the Mets, he never made another All-Star team, and by 1973, he was entirely gone from the organization. Meanwhile, Nolan Ryan would figure it out, and then some. He averaged 21 wins per season over his first 3 years in California, made multiple All-Star teams, and should have won the Cy Young. In the year, he struck out 383 batters, a record that still stands. He threw 4 no-hitters with the Angels alone, and 7 for his career. He finished with 324 wins, 5,714 strikeouts, still an MLB record, and a first-ballot Hall of Fame induction. The parallels to Randy Johnson are pretty obvious, and interestingly, it was Nolan Ryan who helped Johnson turn things around by simply telling him to land on the ball of his foot, making him an accomplice in the slaughter of a bird. The toughest trades for fans are the ones where a franchise legend has to go, but it's assumed they will be getting the right pieces back. By 1997, it was hard to picture Mark McGwire wearing anything other than an Oakland Athletics uniform. He had been the face of the franchise for over a decade, a 9-time All-Star, a Rookie of the Year, and a guy closing in on 400 career home runs. But the A's were struggling, and McGwire wanted to play for a contender. With free agency looming, Oakland knew they had to make a move, and they did. McGwire was traded to the St. Louis Cardinals at the deadline for 3 pitchers, Eric Ludwig, TJ Matthews, and Blake Stein. The A's initially asked for more, wanting a proven arm like Matt Morris, plus a top prospect like Manny Ibar. But the Cardinals said no, and Oakland would fold, and that was a mistake. Eric Ludwig and Blake Stein combined to win 6 games in Oakland. TJ Matthews had a bit more staying power, reaching 5 seasons for the team, but with an ERA of 4.78. Meanwhile, Mark McGwire made nice, clean history. In 1998, he set the single-season home run record, launching 70 home runs and captivating the nation. Hit 220 home runs in St. Louis, and is arguably more recognizable in a Cardinal uniform. It would be interesting to see what team's hat he would wear on his Hall of Fame plaque if he didn't accidentally take steroids for a decade. This was clearly a one-sided trade, but gave us great entertainment in the coming years. Jeff Bagwell will always be remembered as a Houston Astro, but he was actually born in Boston, and he grew up a die-hard Red Sox fan. And for a brief moment, it looked like the perfect story. In 1989, the Red Sox drafted him in the 4th round, and by 1990, he was a rising star in the organization, hitting .333 in Double-A. But that same year, Boston found itself in a playoff race, and they were in desperate need of some help in the bullpen. So at the trade deadline in 1990, they pulled the trigger on a deal that would haunt them. They sent Bagwell to the Houston Astros for the veteran Larry Anderson, and he would pitch just 22 innings for Boston, and he was solid, but in the playoffs, he lost Game 1 of the LCS, as the Red Sox were then swept by the A's. Anderson then hit free agency, and he would leave the team. Meanwhile, for Jeff Bagwell, he won Rookie of the Year in Houston, then he became the face of the franchise. Over the next 15 years, he would hit 449 home runs, won the 1994 MVP, helped the Astros win their first pennant, and would later be inducted into the Hall of Fame. It was a very similar situation to Smoltz, as the hometown team drafted him, then gave him up for a playoff push. That did not result in a pennant, as they would watch their former prospect have a Hall of Fame career. This is a trade that is significant for both the outcome and the 2 teams who initiated the trade. Lou Brock debuted with the Cubs at age 22 in 1961, having blazing speed, but in his first 2.5 seasons, he hit just .257. He looked like a raw talent who was just not there yet. So the Cubs sent him, along with pitchers Jack Spring and Paul Toth, to their bitter rivals in the St. Louis Cardinals in exchange for outfielder Doug Clemens and pitchers Ernie Broglio and Bobby Chance. At the time, Chicago was considered the clear winner. Braulio had won 21 games in 1960 and had just finished 18-8 with a 2.99 ERA, while Shantz actually won the MVP in 1952, and Clemens was viewed as a solid young prospect. Meanwhile, Lou Brock hadn't reached his potential yet. But then, the second half of 1964 happened. Brock hit .348 with 12 home runs the rest of that season and led the Cardinals to a World Series title. And that was just the beginning. He would go on to make 6 All-Star teams, collect over 3,000 hits, and steal a then record 938 bases, becoming one of the greatest leadoff hitters in baseball history and eventually a Hall of Famer. Meanwhile, Shantz didn't finish the year with the Cubs, while Braulio posted a 5.4 ERA in Chicago and was out of baseball just 2 years later. This is a trade that haunted the Cubs for years, mainly because of who was the beneficiary. That's a big reason why these two teams have only made 3 low-impact trades since 1980, and there's a chance it won't happen again for a very long time. Once again, it's tough to see in the future when dealing with a prospect, and it's easy to see why the White Sox regretted this one. In July of 2015, the Chicago White Sox made a move that looked promising. They signed a very young Fernando Tatis Jr. as an international free agent. Of course, the son of Fernando Tatis, who was a 5-tool player and had a ton of potential. But less than a year later, the White Sox made what would end up being a terrible decision. They traded Tatis, along with pitcher Eric Johnson, to the San Diego Padres for veteran starter James Shields and cash. At the time, Shields was clearly past his prime. That season, he was 2-7 with the Padres and clearly struggling on the mound. And as for San Diego, it was a pretty easy decision. And Shields continued to struggle in Chicago, going 16-35 with a 5.31 ERA over his 3 seasons and never reaching the postseason. On the other hand, Tatis Jr. lived up to the hype, becoming a star, leading all of baseball with 42 home runs in 2021, making 3 All-Star teams, and receiving MVP votes in 3 of the last 5 seasons, missing one of those seasons with an injury and a PED suspension. Despite that, this was clearly one-sided and one of the worst trades in recent history. Again, it's always hard to tell with young prospects, but considering the White Sox must have just seen James Shields give up a home run to Bartolo Colon, it may have been questionable from the start. The Cardinals have made a few bad trades lately, but there's none worse than the one they made in 1972. Steve Carlton had been with the Cardinals since '65, winning a World Series, making multiple All-Star teams, and blossoming at the start of the '70s. He had just gone 20-9 for the Cardinals and was asking for a modest raise, $65,000 for the 1972 season, and the Cardinals refused, and so did Carlton. Instead of settling the dispute, St. Louis shipped him to Philadelphia for Rick Wise, who is also a solid pitcher and also holding out over a contract dispute. At first glance, it seemed like an even swap. Carlton had 77 career wins, while Wise had 75, and they both got the raise they wanted. But in the end, one side was the clear winner. Carlton responded by having one of the greatest seasons by any pitcher in MLB history. He went 27-10 with a 1.97 ERA and 310 strikeouts for a Phillies team that only won 59 games. Carlton alone accounting for nearly half of their wins. He won the NL Triple Crown and took home his first of 4 Cy Young Awards. And as for Rick Wise, he was pretty good, winning 16 games in each of his first 2 years in St. Louis before pitching elsewhere for the next 9 seasons. But Carlton became arguably the best pitcher of the 70s. After a slight dip in 1973, he would rattle off 9 straight winning seasons, won 3 more Cy Youngs, and helped the Phillies win their first World Series title in 1980. He retired in 1988 with 329 wins, 10 All-Star selections, and 4,136 strikeouts, the most by a left-handed pitcher. He would be inducted into the Hall of Fame in '94 with over 95% of the vote, as the Cardinals miss out on a generational pitcher over a $65,000 disagreement. This is our most recent one, and it's already clear who won the trade. When the Red Sox traded Mookie Betts to the Dodgers in February 2020, it was a shocker. He was already one of the game's best at just 27 years old, already winning an MVP, and helping Boston win a World Series in 2018. But instead of locking him up long-term, the Red Sox chose to move him, in part to dump salary, shipping him and David Price to the Dodgers in exchange for Alex Verdugo, Jeter Downs, and Connor Wong. And naturally, Red Sox fans were mad. This was a head-scratcher from the start, and it paid off for the Dodgers right away. In his first season with the Dodgers, Betts led them to a World Series title. He's won 2 Gold Gloves, 4 Silver Sluggers, and made 4 All-Star teams with the Dodgers already. And even though he's struggling this season, he's locked up for the long term and helped the Dodgers win another title in 2024. Meanwhile, Boston's return has not been great. The once promising prospect in Jeter Downs is already gone. Alex Verdugo had some solid moments in Boston, but he was eventually shipped to the Yankees. And Connor Wong is still on the team, turning into a decent option behind the plate, but doesn't really help justify the trade. The Red Sox traded off a franchise favorite recently with Rafael Devers, still needs time to develop, but the Red Sox seem to have a history of this. And though there are parallels, they hope the Mookie trade isn't as haunting as the one made a century earlier. Our last one is a trade made a little more famous by a movie. Frank Robinson was already a franchise great for the Cincinnati Reds, leading them to a pennant and winning an MVP. But as he was reaching the end of his 20s, one sentence would change everything. Reds general manager Bill DeWitt famously claimed Robinson was an old 30, implying that his best years were behind him. And spoiler alert, they were not. In December of 1965, the Reds made that infamous trade, sending Frank Robinson to the Baltimore Orioles in exchange for pitchers Milt Pappas, Jack Bolchin, and outfielder Dick Simpson. Pappas pitched decently for the Reds, winning 30 games over 2.5 seasons, but Bolchin and Simpson accomplished virtually nothing in Cincinnati. Meanwhile, Robinson wasted no time proving the Reds wrong. Joining a solid team, in his very first season with the Orioles, he won the Triple Crown, which will give him his second MVP, becoming the first and only player until Shohei Ohtani to win MVP awards in both leagues. And he would help the Orioles win their first ever World Series title. Robinson would go on to spend 6 seasons in Baltimore, adding another World Series title in 1970, this time ironically beating his former team, the Cincinnati Reds, as he became a first-ballot Hall of Famer, going in as a Baltimore Oriole. It was a terrible one-sided trade like all of these just based on what's seen on paper, but there is a case you can make that it led to the Big Red Machine in the 1970s. And you can watch my video about that topic below.